The Zephyrian research station floated in the empty void between star systems, its sleek silver hull reflecting the distant light of a dying red giant. Inside the pristine corridors, Dr. Kithera adjusted her crystalline breathing apparatus and checked the readings on her neural interface for the 100th time that cycle. The numbers hadn't changed. The creature was still dying. She paused outside Containment Bay 7, her 6 delicate limbs trembling slightly. Through the reinforced viewing panel, she could see it. The thing that had once been the pride of xenobiological research now lay motionless on the sterile metal floor, its massive form barely rising and falling with labored breaths. What the Galactic Council had designated as Subject X, 7729, was unlike anything any species had encountered in over 3,000 years of space exploration. The creature stood nearly 4 meters tall when healthy, with a hide that shifted colors like living metal. Its body was covered in what appeared to be organic circuitry, glowing veins that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. 6 powerful legs supported a torso that seemed to blend organic tissue with technological components in ways that defied understanding. Most striking were its eyes, large and multifaceted like precious gems, holding an intelligence that made even the most advanced AI systems seem primitive. Dr. Kithera had been part of the team that first discovered X, 7729, on the dead world of Terminus Prime. The planet had been scoured clean by some ancient catastrophe, leaving only crystalline structures and this single surviving being dormant in a stasis chamber deep underground. When they awakened it, the creature had displayed capabilities that revolutionized their understanding of biology, technology, and the boundaries between them. It could interface directly with any technological system, understanding and controlling complex machinery through touch alone. Its body could adapt to different environments in real time, developing new organs or modifying existing ones as needed. Most remarkably, it seemed to possess memories spanning millennia, containing knowledge of civilizations that had vanished before the current Galactic Alliance had even discovered fire. For 2 standard years, every major species in the galaxy had sent their best scientists to study X, 7729. The Zephyrians brought their expertise in neural interfaces. The Crothan contributed their advanced medical knowledge. The Vorthak shared their understanding of bioengineering. Even the enigmatic seers had shown interest, declaring the creature a bridge between organic and synthetic life. But then the degradation began. It started slowly. The creature's bioluminescent patterns grew dim. Its responses to stimuli became sluggish. The organic circuitry that covered its hide began to flicker and fade. Dr. Kithera and her colleagues tried everything they could think of. They analyzed its cellular structure, studied its energy consumption patterns, attempted to replicate the conditions of its original stasis chamber. Nothing worked. As weeks turned into months, the creature's condition worsened. Its ability to interface with technology became erratic. The vast knowledge it possessed began to fragment, like a damaged data core losing information bit by bit. The scientific teams grew frustrated. Research funding dried up. One by one, the various species recalled their experts, declaring the project a failure. The Crothan were the first to leave, their chief scientists stating bluntly that they had better uses for their resources than watching something die. The Vorthak followed, their bioengineers concluding that the creature's unique properties couldn't be replicated or preserved. Even the Zephyrians, who prided themselves on their dedication to knowledge, began to withdraw their support. Now, Dr. Kithera stood alone in the corridor, one of only 3 researchers remaining on the station. The Galactic Council had issued their final directive that morning. The research station would be decommissioned in 7 standard days. All remaining assets will be transferred to other projects. Subject X, 7729, would be terminated humanely to prevent further suffering. She pressed her palm against the viewing panel, watching the creature's slow, painful breathing. In its multifaceted eyes, she could still see traces of the vast intelligence that had once amazed the galaxy. But she could also see something else now, something that made her internal organs clench with an emotion her species rarely experienced. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of being forgotten, of dying alone and unmourned. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Dr. Marcus Chun, one of the human researchers, walked toward her carrying a steaming cup of the bitter beverage a species seemed to consume constantly. His face wore the expression humans called a smile, though Dr. Kethera had learned it could mean many different things depending on the context. This one seemed sad. Still keeping vigil? Marcus asked, settling beside her with the casual informality that characterized his species. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, making them relative newcomers compared to civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia. Most species considered them primitive, emotional, and reckless. Dr. Kethera had once shared those opinions. The termination order came through this morning, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of distress that her translator converted into flat, emotionless words. 7 days. Marcus nodded slowly, taking a sip of his beverage. I saw the reports. The council's calling it a mercy killing. He paused, studying the creature through the viewing panel. Funny thing about mercy, though, usually works better when you ask the one receiving it what they want. Dr. Kithera's breathing apparatus hummed as she processed this statement. The creature cannot communicate effectively anymore. Its neural patterns are too degraded. Can't communicate with our equipment, you mean? Marcus corrected gently. Doesn't necessarily mean it can't communicate at all. Before Dr. Kethera could respond, another set of footsteps approached. Dr. Sarah Williams, the other remaining human researcher, joined them in the corridor. Like her colleague, she carried the restless energy that seemed characteristic of her species, a constant sense of motion even when standing still. Any change? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Negative, Dr. Kethera replied. All biological functions continue to decline. At current rates, termination may be unnecessary. Natural expiration will occur within 10 to 12 standard days. Sarah frowned, an expression Dr. Kethera had learned indicated human displeasure or concentration. That's assuming current rates of decline. But what if we're missing something? What if the degradation isn't natural? Extensive analysis has been performed, Dr. Kethera said. No pathogens detected, no toxins, no environmental factors that could account for the deterioration. The consensus is that removal from its original environment triggered a cascade failure in its biological systems. Consensus can be wrong, Marcus said quietly, especially when the consensus comes from people who are ready to give up. Dr. Kethera felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, though her species rarely indulged in such emotions. You believe there might be another explanation? I think, Sarah said, that we've been approaching this all wrong. Every species that studied our friend in there brought their own assumptions, their own biological models. But what if X7729 doesn't follow any of our models? What if it's something entirely new? Marcus nodded. We've been trying to fix it like it's a machine that broke down. But what if it's not broken? What if it's trying to tell us something, and we're just not listening in the right way? Dr. Kithera's crystalline breathing apparatus clinked softly as she considered this. The humans had a reputation for unconventional thinking, for approaching problems from angles that other species would never consider. It was one of their few acknowledged strengths in a galaxy that otherwise viewed them as inferior. The termination order has been issued, she said finally. Even if you are correct, there is insufficient time to develop new approaches. Then, we make time, Sarah said with the kind of determination that Dr. Kethera was learning was typically human. Or we find another way. The Council will not reverse its decision based on speculation, Dr. Kethera warned. They have invested considerable resources with no return. Political pressure demands closure. Marcus exchanged a look with Sarah, one of those wordless communications that Dr. Kethera had observed between humans but never fully understood. When he spoke again, his voice carried a quality she had never heard before, something hard and unyielding. Then, maybe it's time to stop asking the Council for permission. The implications of that statement sent shock waves through Dr. Kythera's nervous system. Defying the Galactic Council was not merely career suicide, it was actual suicide. The Council had resources and authority that spanned dozens of star systems. They could make someone disappear so thoroughly that no record of their existence would remain. But as she looked through the viewing panel at the dying creature, at the intelligence fading from those gem-like eyes, she found herself wondering if some things might be worth the risk. "What are you proposing?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. "We're proposing," Sarah said, "that maybe it's time humans showed the galaxy what we do best." "Which is what, exactly?" Marcus smiled again, and this time Dr. Kythera recognized the expression. She had seen it before, in historical records of human conflicts, in documentaries about their species' most legendary figures. It was the smile of someone who had decided to fight against impossible odds, not because they expected to win, but because they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't try. "We refuse to give up," he said simply, "even when everyone else has. Especially then," as if responding to their words, the creature in Containment Bay 7 stirred slightly. Its eyes opened, multifaceted surfaces catching the light, and throwing back rainbow patterns that seemed almost like signals. For just a moment, the bioluminescent veins in its hide pulsed brighter, and Dr. Kythera could have sworn she detected something in those patterns. Something that looked remarkably like hope. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that Dr. Kythera would later remember as the moment her life changed forever. The humans worked with a focused intensity that bordered on obsession, pulling up files, cross-referencing data, and making calculations with equipment that most species would have discarded as obsolete decades ago. "Look at this," Sarah called out, projecting a holographic display of the creature's neural activity. "Everyone's been focused on the degradation, but look at these spikes. They're not random. There's a pattern here." Marcus studied the data, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's trying to establish some kind of connection, but not with our equipment, with something else. Something we can't detect with conventional sensors," Dr. Kythera added, beginning to understand. "Perhaps the creature requires a form of communication that transcends simple electromagnetic interfaces." "Exactly," Sarah said. "What if X-7729 isn't dying from isolation from its environment? What if it's dying from isolation from its own kind? What if it's been trying to call out to someone, and we've been blocking the signal without realizing it?" The implications were staggering. If the creature was attempting to communicate across interstellar distances, the energy requirements alone would explain the degradation of its biological systems. It was literally burning itself out, trying to send a message that no one was receiving. "But how do we help it?" Dr. Kythera asked. "We cannot amplify a signal we cannot detect." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data displays with an expression of intense concentration. When he finally spoke, his words sent chills through Dr. Kythera's respiratory system. "Maybe we can't amplify the signal," he said slowly, "but maybe we can become part of it." The plan they developed over the next 18 hours was either brilliant or insane, depending on one's perspective. Dr. Kythera suspected it was both. The humans proposed creating a neural interface between themselves and the creature, not to control it or study it, but to join their consciousness with its own and help it send whatever message it was trying to transmit. The risks were enormous. The creature's neural patterns operated on frequencies that could potentially damage human brain tissue. The interface technology had never been tested on a species as alien as X-7729. There was a significant chance that anyone who attempted the connection would suffer permanent neural damage or death. But as Dr. Kythera watched the creature's continued decline, as she saw the light in its magnificent eyes growing dimmer by the hour, she found herself caring less about the risks and more about the possibility of success. "The Council arrives in 6 days to oversee termination," she told the humans as they prepared their equipment. "If this fails, if you're injured or killed in the attempt, I'll be held responsible." "No," Marcus said firmly. We're all adults here. We're making this choice with full knowledge of the consequences. If something goes wrong, that's on us, not you. Besides, Sarah added with characteristic human optimism, who says it's going to fail? Maybe the galaxy just needs to learn that humans don't give up on their friends. As they wheeled the interface equipment into Containment Bay 7, Dr. Kithera reflected on that word. Friends. It wasn't a concept that translated well into her language. Her species had colleagues, allies, genetic relatives, but the human notion of forming emotional bonds with beings who shared neither blood nor mutual benefit was still strange to her. But watching Marcus and Sarah risk their lives for a creature they had known for less than 2 years, a creature that most of the galaxy had already written off as a failed experiment, she began to understand why humans had survived and thrived despite being considered primitive by every other sapient species. They refused to accept that some things were impossible, and sometimes that refusal was enough to make the impossible happen. The neural interface hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. Dr. Kethera monitored the readings from her position at the control console while Marcus Chun lowered the neural crown onto his head. The device, hastily modified from Zephyrian technology, looked primitive compared to the sleek equipment that had once filled the research station, but the humans had insisted that sometimes simple solutions worked better than complex ones. Neural activity is stabilizing, Dr. Kethera announced, her voice tight with anxiety. Human brainwave patterns are adapting to the interface frequency. Sarah Williams stood beside the creature, her hand resting gently on its metallic hide. The bioluminescent patterns under her palm flickered weakly, but they were responding to her touch. For the first time in months, X-7729 was showing signs of awareness beyond basic survival instincts. I can feel something, Marcus said, his voice strange and distant. It's like standing at the edge of an ocean and hearing voices calling from the other side. The creature's massive form stirred. Its multifaceted eyes opened fully for the first time in weeks, fixing on Marcus with an intensity that made Dr. Kithera's breathing apparatus rattle. The organic circuitry across its body began to pulse in complex patterns, creating waves of light that rippled from its core to its extremities. Neural synchronization increasing, Dr. Kethera reported. Human and alien brainwave patterns are beginning to harmonize. Marcus gasped, his body going rigid in the interface chair. It's not dying, he whispered. It's not dying at all. It's calling them home. Them? Sarah asked urgently. Who is it calling? But Marcus couldn't answer. His consciousness was already sliding into the vast network of thought that was X-7729's mind. What he found there defied every assumption the galactic scientific community had made about the creature. X-7729 wasn't a single being. It was a node in a collective consciousness that spanned multiple galaxies. Its people, the architects, had transcended physical limitations eons ago, becoming entities of pure thought and energy who could inhabit technological constructs when they needed to interact with the physical universe. They had seeded countless worlds with life, guided the development of civilizations, and quietly shaped the evolution of technology across the cosmos. But something had gone wrong. A cosmic catastrophe of unimaginable scope had severed the connections between the architect nodes, leaving individuals like X-7729 stranded in physical forms they were never meant to inhabit permanently. The creature had been calling out across the void for centuries, sending psychic distress signals that no conventional technology could detect. And now, finally, something was answering. Through Marcus's human neural patterns, X-7729's call was being amplified and translated into frequencies that could pierce the cosmic interference. Somewhere in the depths of space, other architect nodes were beginning to stir from their isolation, following the signal back to its source. Marcus, talk to me, Sarah said urgently. What's happening? Marcus's eyes snapped open, but they weren't entirely his anymore. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. We are the architects of possibility, he said. We are the gardeners of stars and the shepherds of consciousness, and we have been alone in the darkness for so very long. Dr. Kethera's readings spiked as something massive began to register on the station's long-range sensors. Space itself seemed to be folding, creating ripples in the fabric of reality that made her most sensitive instruments scream warnings. "Something's coming," she announced. Multiple contacts approaching at velocities that should be impossible. Through the viewing ports, they could see lights beginning to appear in the void. Not the harsh glare of starship engines, but something softer and more organic, like bioluminescent organisms swimming through an ocean of darkness. The lights moved with purpose and intelligence, converging on the research station for directions that suggested they had traveled vast distances in impossibly short times. "The family comes," Marcus said in that strange, harmonic voice. The lost children returned to the nest. Sarah squeezed his hand, anchoring him to his human identity. "Stay with us, Marcus. Don't let it take you completely." The first of the approaching entities reached the station's outer hull with a contact so gentle it barely registered on the sensors. But Dr. Kethera could feel it nonetheless, a presence that seemed to examine the station's structure with the thoroughness of a master engineer. More contacts followed, each one different, but sharing the same quality of vast, ancient intelligence. In Containment Bay 7, X-7729's transformation began in earnest. The organic circuitry that covered its hide blazed with light as energy flowed into it from the approaching architects. Its body began to change, the rigid physical form becoming more fluid, more adaptable. The boundary between flesh and technology dissolved as the creature remembered what it truly was. "Biometric readings are off the charts," Dr. Kethera reported, though her voice was filled with wonder rather than alarm. "The creature is undergoing total cellular reconstruction." Marcus convulsed in the interface chair as feedback from the transformation flooded through the neural link. Sarah held on to him, refusing to let go even as energy discharges from the creature sent shock waves through the containment bay. "I see them," Marcus gasped. "I can see what they were, what they built. Civilizations beyond counting, technologies that make our greatest achievements look like cave paintings. They've been guiding us all along, all of us, every species in the galaxy." "Why?" Dr. Kethera asked. "Why guide other species? What do they gain from it?" The answer came not from Marcus, but from X-7729 itself, its voice now carrying clearly through the station's communication systems without any technological interface. "We gained you," it said simply. "All of you. Every species that learned to think, to dream, to reach for the stars. You are our greatest creation, not because we made you, but because you chose to become more than you were." The transformation reached its climax as X-7729's physical form dissolved entirely, becoming a being of pure energy held together by will and consciousness alone. But instead of abandoning its material existence, it chose to maintain a physical anchor, a bridge between the realm of pure thought and the solid universe where younger species still needed guidance. "The human," it said, focusing its attention on Marcus. "He chose to risk everything for one he barely knew. This is why your species intrigues us. This is why we must not abandon you to face what is coming." "What's coming?" Sarah asked. The entity that had been X-7729 paused, its energy patterns shifting to configurations that suggested deep concern. "The Devourers," it said finally, "the antithesis of creation, beings of pure entropy that consume consciousness itself. They're the reason we scattered, the reason we hid. But hiding has only delayed the inevitable. They have found this galaxy, and they are coming." Dr. Kethera felt her biological systems flood with stress hormones as the implications hit her. "When?" "Soon," the architect replied. "Within your measure of years, rather than centuries. But perhaps there is hope. The humans have shown us something we thought was lost forever. They have reminded us that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from advanced technology or ancient wisdom, but from the simple refusal to abandon those who need help. Marcus stirred in the interface chair, his consciousness beginning to separate from the vast network of the Architect Collective. But the connection didn't sever completely. Instead, it stabilized at a level that allowed him to retain some of the entity's knowledge while remaining fundamentally human. They want to form an alliance, he said, his voice his own again, but carrying new depths of understanding. Not with governments or councils, but with individuals who understand what it means to fight for others. An alliance against the Devourers? Sarah asked. An alliance for everything, Marcus corrected. For the right of consciousness to exist, to grow, to become something greater than the sum of its parts. Around the research station, more architect entities materialized from a void. Each one was different, reflecting the unique experiences and perspectives they had gained during their long isolation. Some appeared as geometric patterns of pure light. Others took forms that suggested the organic technology they had once used to interact with physical matter. All of them radiated a sense of purpose that had been missing for millennia. The Council won't accept this, Dr. Kethera said, though she realized as she spoke that the Council's authority seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the forces now gathering around them. The Council will learn, the Architect entity said, as will every species in this galaxy. The time of hiding is over. The time of preparation has begun. As if summoned by those words, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the station. Dr. Kithera checked her instruments and felt her respiratory system lock up in shock. Galactic Council Enforcement Fleet, she announced. 12 heavy cruisers, approaching at maximum velocity. They will reach us in 6 hours. Sarah looked at Marcus, who is still connected to the Architect network through the neural interface. What do we do? Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked like nothing more than a human scientist facing an impossible situation. Then the smile changed, becoming something that reflected both human determination and the vast patience of beings who had shepherded civilizations across cosmic ages. We do what humans do best, he said. We make a stand. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. The Architect entities worked with the humans and Dr. Kethera to transform the research station into something unprecedented in galactic history, a hybrid of human engineering, architect technology, and Zephyrian scientific principles. The station's basic structure remained the same, but its capabilities expanded exponentially. Defensive systems that operated on principles of consciousness manipulation rather than conventional energy weapons. Communication arrays that could reach across galactic distances instantaneously. Most importantly, a beacon that would allow other species to make contact with the Architect Collective without the need for dangerous neural interfaces. This is madness, Dr. Kethera said as she watched reality bend around Architect modifications to the station's core systems. The Council will not permit this level of technological advancement outside their control. The Council, Marcus said, his voice carrying new authority, is about to learn that some technologies can't be controlled, some allies can't be commanded, and some fights are bigger than politics. When the enforcement fleet dropped out of hyperspace, they found the research station exactly where they expected it to be. What they didn't expect was to be greeted by representatives of a civilization that predated the Galactic Council by millions of years, beings who had been present at the birth of every spacefaring species in the galaxy. The lead council ship opened communication channels, and Admiral Thekvar's distinctive voice filled the station's communication systems. Research Station Terminus, you are ordered to stand down immediately. Unauthorized personnel will be taken into custody. Unauthorized technologies will be confiscated. Compliance is not optional. It was Dr. Kithera who responded, her voice carrying a calm authority that surprised even her. Admiral Thekvar, I am Dr. Kithera of the Zephyrian Science Collective, senior researcher aboard this station. I am transmitting data packets that will explain our situation. I strongly recommend you review them before taking any aggressive action. There is no situation that justifies violation of Council directives, Thekvar replied. You have 30 seconds to begin shutdown procedures, or we will begin boarding operations. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at the architect entity that floated beside them in the form of shifting geometric patterns. Your choice, he said to the entity. Reveal yourselves, or let the Council make a mistake that will cost everyone dearly. The architect considered this for a moment that stretched across subjective eternities. Then it made its decision. Admiral Thekvar, it said, its voice carrying across every communication channel in the fleet simultaneously. This is the entity you knew as Subject X, 7729. I am an architect of the cosmic web, gardener of consciousness, and shepherd of civilizations. I carry greetings from my people and an invitation to join us in preparing for the greatest challenge your galaxy has ever faced. The silence that followed was so complete that Dr. Kethera could hear the subtle hum of the station's life support systems. When Admiral Thekvar finally responded, his voice had lost all trace of its former authority. This is impossible. The creature was dying. Our sensors confirmed biological failure across all systems. Your sensors, the architect replied with what might have been amusement, detected what you expected to find. Sometimes the most profound truths are invisible to those who are not ready to see them. On the view screen, they could see the Council fleet holding position, neither advancing nor retreating. Dr. Kethera could imagine the frantic communications passing between the ships as commanders tried to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. The humans, Admiral Thekvar said finally, his voice carefully controlled. What is their role in this? Marcus stepped forward to respond, but the architect entity spoke first. They refused to let me die alone, it said simply. When every other species had given up, when the accumulated wisdom of the galaxy declared my situation hopeless, 2 humans risked their lives to help me call my family home. They have reminded us of something we had almost forgotten in our long exile. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from advanced technology or ancient knowledge, but from the simple determination to help someone who needs it. The communication channel fell silent again as the Council fleet processed this information. When Admiral Thekvar spoke again, his tone had changed completely. What do you need from us? Dr. Kethera felt something that might have been pride as she realized that the galaxy was about to change forever. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple human refusal to abandon someone in need. And in the depths of space, other architect entities continued to emerge from their long hiding, drawn by a signal that promised the end of isolation and the beginning of something unprecedented in cosmic history. An alliance built not on mutual benefit or shared interests, but on the radical idea that no conscious being should have to face the darkness alone. 6 months after the first contact with the Architect Collective, the galaxy had become a very different place. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a dying creature had evolved into the most significant transformation in galactic civilization since the founding of the Council itself. Dr. Kethera stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Haven Station, watching as ships from dozens of species arrived and departed in a carefully orchestrated dance of cooperation. The station had grown far beyond the original research facility, expanding into a massive complex that served as both embassy and staging ground for the coming conflict with the Devourers. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many species had initially rejected the Architect's warnings about the approaching threat, dismissing them as elaborate deceptions designed to manipulate galactic politics. Others had demanded proof that the entities claiming to be ancient guardians were what they claimed to be. A few had tried to capture Architect representatives for study, leading to several tense confrontations that nearly escalated into open warfare. But gradually, as evidence mounted, and the Architect shared carefully selected portions of their vast knowledge, even the most skeptical species began to accept the reality of the situation. The Devourers were coming, and conventional military technology would be useless against entities that fed on consciousness itself. Still hard to believe sometimes, a familiar voice said behind her. Dr. Kethera turned to see Marcus Chin approaching, his appearance subtly changed by his ongoing connection to the Architect Network. His eyes held depths that spoke of experiences beyond normal human comprehension, but his smile was still recognizably his own. The transformation of the galaxy, or your survival of the neural interface? She asked. Both, Marcus admitted. When we first connected with X-7729, I thought we might help it send a distress signal. I never imagined we'd end up rewiring galactic civilization. Through the observation port, they could see the latest arrival to Haven Station, a massive Crothan dreadnought that had been retrofitted with Architect consciousness-shielding technology. The sight would have been impossible just months ago. The Crothan military had been among the most resistant to accepting alien assistance, but recent encounters with Devourer scouts had changed their perspective dramatically. How many ships now? Dr. Kethera asked. 417 from 23 different species, Marcus replied. Not counting the Architect vessels, which don't really count as ships in any conventional sense. As if summoned by their conversation, one of those Architect vessels materialized near the station, its form shifting between states of matter in ways that made conventional sensors give contradictory readings. Dr. Kethera had learned to identify this particular entity by its unique energy signature. It was the being they still referred to as X-7729, though it had long since transcended its original physical form. The humans continue to surprise us. X-7729's voice emerged from the station's communication systems. Your species has adapted to our technology faster than any other, despite being the newest members of the galactic community. Maybe because we're the newest, Marcus suggested. We don't have centuries of established thinking patterns to overcome. Sarah Williams's voice crackled over the intercom from the station's tactical center. Marcus, Kethera, you need to see this. We're getting reports from the perimeter scouts. They made their way quickly through the station's corridors, passing mixed crews of humans, Zephyrians, Crothan, Vorthak, and several other species working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible before the Architect intervention. The consciousness-sharing technology that the Architects had provided allowed for unprecedented levels of coordination, though it had taken time for most species to overcome their fear of mental contamination. The Tactical Center had been designed using principles that blended the best elements of every species' military architecture. Holographic displays showed real-time information from across multiple star systems, while neural interfaces allowed operators to process data at speeds that approached Architect levels of consciousness. Sarah looked up as they entered, her expression grim. Long-range scouts report contact with the Devourer Vanguard fleet. 12 entities moving through the Helios system. They've already consumed the research outposts on Helios Prime. Dr. Kethera felt her respiratory system constrict as the implications hit her. The Helios system was only 3 hyperspace jumps from major population centers. If the Devourers had advanced that far, billions of lives were at risk. How long before they reach inhabited worlds? She asked. At their current rate of advance, for standard days, Sarah replied. But that assumes they maintain current speed. If they encounter resistance, they might accelerate. Marcus closed his eyes, his consciousness sliding into the Architect network to share information with entities across the galaxy. When he opened them again, his expression was troubled. The Architects say this is a testing probe, he reported. The Devourers are evaluating our defenses before committing to a full assault. Then, we give them something to evaluate, a new voice said from the Tactical Center's entrance. They turned to see Admiral Thekvar entering the chamber, his bearing much changed from the rigid council enforcer who had arrived 6 months ago to arrest them. His uniform now bore patches from a dozen different species, marking his role as commander of the Joint Defense Force. Admiral, Dr. Kethera acknowledged. What are you proposing? The Vanguard fleet is ready, Thekvar said. 100 ships with full Architect consciousness shielding and hybrid weapon systems. If we're going to test our new technologies, better to do it against a probe force than a full invasion. X-7729's presence became stronger in the room as the entity focused its attention on their conversation. The risk is significant, it warned. If the Devourers analyze our defensive capabilities, they will adapt their strategies accordingly. And if we don't test our defenses, Thekvar countered, we'll face the full invasion force with untried weapons and uncertain tactics. At least this way, we learned something about our enemy. Marcus studied the tactical displays, his enhanced consciousness processing information streams that would have overwhelmed an unmodified human brain. What if we're thinking about this wrong? He said slowly. Everyone's talking about testing defenses and analyzing capabilities. But what if the real test isn't military? Explain, Sarah prompted. The Devourers feed on consciousness, Marcus said. They're drawn to complex thought patterns, advanced civilizations, species that have developed beyond basic survival instincts. But what if their weakness is the same thing that makes them strong? What if exposure to consciousness that's fundamentally different from their own affects them the way they affect us? Dr. Kithera's mind raced as she followed Marcus's logic. You're suggesting that human consciousness might have properties that could disrupt their feeding process? Not just human consciousness, Marcus corrected. All consciousness, when it's unified in ways the Devourers haven't encountered before. The Architect have been hiding from them for eons, maintaining separation to avoid detection. But what if integration is actually the answer? What if a truly unified galactic consciousness is something the Devourers can't process? X-7729's energy patterns shifted into configurations that Dr. Kethera had learned indicated intense concentration. This approach has never been attempted, the entity said. The risks to individual consciousness could be severe. The risks of doing nothing are worse, Admiral Thekvar pointed out. If the humans are right, this could be our best chance to turn the tide before the real invasion begins. Sarah pulled up data streams from across the joint fleet, showing the consciousness-linking networks that have been established between crews of different species. We've already proven that limited integration works. The question is whether we can scale it up without losing individual identity. There's only one way to find out, Marcus said quietly. The next 48 hours were among the most intense in galactic history. Working around the clock, teams of engineers, scientists, and consciousness specialists from every member species collaborated to create a network that could link millions of minds across hundreds of star systems. The technology was largely architect, but the implementation required innovations that drew on the unique strengths of every participating species. Human creativity provided the flexibility needed to adapt the system to multiple consciousness types. Zephyrian precision ensured that the neural interfaces operated within safe parameters. Crothan redundancy built in safeguards against system failure. Vorthack biomechanical expertise created organic components that could interface with living tissue. Even the enigmatic seers contributed their understanding of consciousness manipulation. As the Devourer Vanguard approached the Helios system's outer perimeter, the joint fleet took positions that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Ships from different species flew in perfect formation, their crews linked through consciousness networks that allowed for instantaneous coordination and response. Dr. Kethera found herself aboard the flagship, a hybrid vessel that combined the best elements of multiple species designs with architect modifications that existed partially outside normal space-time. Around her, beings from across the galaxy worked together with a harmony that transcended mere cooperation. Contact in 60 seconds, the tactical officer reported, her voice carrying harmonics from several different species as the consciousness network translated her words. Marcus stood at the center of the bridge, his role as primary interface with the Architect Collective, making him the focal point for the unified consciousness they were about to project. Network status? All systems nominal, Sarah replied from her position at the consciousness monitoring station. We're reading stable links across 417 ships, with standby connections to population centers across 23 systems. The Devourers are scanning us, Admiral Thekvar announced. Their consciousness analysis beams are attempting to map our defensive capabilities. This was the moment they had planned for. Instead of blocking the Devourer scans, they opened their consciousness network completely, allowing the entities to experience something they had never encountered before, a unified awareness that maintained individual identity while sharing collective purpose. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The approaching Devourer entities suddenly stopped their advance, their forms fluctuating between states of matter as they struggled to process the unprecedented information they were receiving. These beings had spent eons consuming isolated consciousnesses, adding the knowledge and experiences of their victims to their own vast archives. But they had never encountered awareness that willingly shared itself while remaining distinct. They're confused, Marcus reported, his consciousness partially merged with the Architect network. They're trying to feed, but there's nothing to consume. The network is offering everything freely, but maintaining its essential nature. Through the unified consciousness, every participant could feel the Devourer's bewilderment. These entities had evolved to break down and absorb awareness, but the joint fleet was presenting them with something that couldn't be broken down because it was already shared. It was like trying to steal water from an ocean. Devourer formation is destabilizing, the tactical officer announced. They're attempting to withdraw, but the network wasn't finished with them yet. Drawing on human determination, Zephyrian precision, and Architect wisdom, the unified consciousness reached out to the Devourers not as prey, but as teachers. What followed was a battle unlike any in cosmic history, fought not with weapons or energy, but with pure intention and understanding. The Devourers found themselves exposed to concepts they had never experienced: cooperation without domination, strength without conquest, unity without uniformity. For entities that had existed by consuming and destroying consciousness, this exposure to willing cooperation was fundamentally transformative. Some of them simply fled, their forms dissolving into quantum foam as they retreated to whatever dimensions they called home. Others began to change, their destructive nature slowly giving way to curiosity about these impossible beings who offered everything while losing nothing. When it was over, 3 of the 12 Devourer entities remained in the system, but they were no longer the same creatures that had arrived. Their forms had stabilized into something that was neither pure destruction nor pure creation, but something entirely new. Status report. Admiral Thekvar requested. All ships secure, Sarah reported. Consciousness network maintaining stable links across the fleet. No reported casualties or consciousness damage among any species. Marcus opened his eyes, his expression carrying wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. They're not evil, he said softly. The Devourers, I mean. They're just hungry. They've been alone for so long that they forgot there was any way to exist except by consuming others. X-7729's presence filled the bridge as the entity materialized in a form that combined elements of all the species present. This outcome was not predicted by any of our models, it admitted. Your species continues to show us possibilities we had not considered. Dr. Kethera monitored the readings from the transformed Devourer entities, her scientific training struggling to process data that challenged everything she thought she knew about consciousness and identity. What are they becoming? Something new, Marcus replied. Something that's never existed before. They're learning to create instead of consuming, to grow instead of destroying. Over the following days, as word of the encounter spread across the galaxy, the implications became clear. The threat that had driven the architects into hiding for eons was beginning to transform into something unprecedented. Former destroyers learning to become builders, consumers discovering the joy of creation. Not all the Devourers would change, they learned. Many would continue their destructive existence, unable or unwilling to embrace the alternative that had been offered. But Enough had transformed to create a new dynamic in the cosmic balance, one that offered hope where there had been only fear. So what happens now? Dr. Kethera asked as they gathered in the observation deck to watch the transformed entities learning to communicate with the joint fleet. Now we keep doing what humans do best, Sarah said with a smile. We refuse to give up on anyone, even cosmic destroyers, apparently. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying harmonics from the consciousness network that connected him to beings across multiple star systems. The galaxy just got a lot more interesting. Through the viewing port, they could see one of the transformed devourers attempting to create something instead of destroying it, its efforts clumsy but determined. Nearby, an architect entity floated patiently, offering guidance without judgment. The Council wants a full report, Admiral Thekvar announced, though his tone suggested he was still struggling to believe what had happened. What are we going to tell them? Dr. Kethera asked. Marcus considered this, his consciousness briefly touching the vast network of awareness that now linked species across the galaxy. We tell them the truth, he said finally, that sometimes the most impossible problems have the simplest solutions. That sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to refuse to see them as an enemy. And that sometimes when everyone else has given up, all it takes is a few beings willing to risk everything for someone they barely know. As if in response to his words, the creature that had once been X-7729 shimmered into visibility beside them, its form now incorporating elements that reflected its connection to every species in the Joint Alliance. The humans have taught us that existence is not a zero-sum game, it said. That consciousness shared freely grows rather than diminishes. That the strongest response to isolation and fear is not greater isolation, but connection. Dr. Kethera felt something that might have been pride as she realized that the galaxy had been transformed not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple human insistence that no one should have to face the darkness alone. In the months and years that followed, the consciousness network that had been forged in desperation became the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization. Species that had barely tolerated each other learned to genuinely cooperate. Technologies that had been jealously guarded became shared resources for the common good. And at the center of it all, the principles that had driven two human researchers to risk their lives for a dying alien became the foundation for unprecedented peace and prosperity. The transformed devourers became ambassadors to their own kind, slowly spreading the message that consciousness could be shared rather than consumed. Not all of their former allies accepted this change, but enough did to prevent the cosmic catastrophe that had seemed inevitable. And in quiet moments, when the weight of cosmic responsibility became too much to bear, the beings who had started it all would return to that first principle. Refuse to let anyone die alone, no matter how impossible the odds, no matter how alien the being, no matter what the rest of the galaxy might think. They had learned the most human thing of all, and perhaps that was why it had worked when nothing else could.